Do you know what this is? This is my honor and my legacy, heritage. This is a certification of merit, and this hereby recognizes that my father, Mandelblit Baruch, participated in the war to liberate this land, and he got injured, and therefore he can put on his battle medallion. It is signed by the commander of the Etzel, Menachem Begin, and Eitan Livni, the operations officer, his daughter, is here with us this evening, and Micha Pahi. Can you show this? His nickname in the Ensel was Amir. He was almost killed in the operation for the liberation of Jaffa. It was called the Hametz operation, and he raised and educated his children, including myself, in the ways of Beitar and Ze'ev Jabotinsky and his predecessor, Menachem Begin, of course. The founding forefathers of the State of Israel, regardless of their partisan affiliation, all believed in the values of the Declaration of Independence, the values that are the basis of the State of Israel. These values are values that nobody ever thought people would dispute. And, you know, like the kids say, well, no, we are experiencing a regime revolution. It's not illegal or judiciary reform, and I'll try to prove that. And it'll be more convenient for me because of how I grew up to address these matters in the terms of the head of Beitar and the person who followed in his footsteps, Menachem Begin. And like I told you, these are the values I was raised on. And I think that their definitions are also more accurate, but that's my own personal opinion. I will be using 3 quotes out of many statements and quotes that we have from the head of Beitar and from Menachem Begin. And I will use 3 of them as I speak here this evening. Well, they talked about a liberal nationality in contrast to nationalism or integral nationality. What does that mean? A nationality, that is the nation state of the State of Israel, which is equal to the Jewish branch of the Declaration of Independence, and liberal, that is equal to the Democratic branch of the Declaration of Independence. But it's even more accurate because obviously there is no such thing, a democracy which isn't liberal. It was very clear to them. Maybe today it's less clear. So the majority rule is very important. It's important to me as well. The person who was elected must lead the state, and we must follow that person's directives. But that is merely a formal democracy. It's not a democracy yet. It is not enough. We also need a substantial democracy which maintains the basic rights of every human being, their liberty, the equal rights to minorities, and these things are obvious. I thought they were obvious, but it turns out that they're not that obvious. Who is in charge of maintaining these values? According to Menachem Begin and Jabotinsky, the first quote is from 1952. That's 71 years ago. It's a very famous quote. There are certain rights that people said that these are rights that cannot be negated. These human rights precede the state, and there are 3 foundations of a certain worldview, and these are, as I believe, the liberty of the individual, correcting society, and the supremacy of the law. The parliaments, that is the Knesset in our case, become instruments in the hands of governments instead of being the government supervisors, and he could already see that 70 years ago. The independent law, which is the last fortress of human liberty today, and when the fortress of law falls, no one can save a person who is grinded by the grindstones of power. In order to maintain human liberty, our forefathers, and especially Menachem Begin, taught us that there is a sacred duty to maintain the independence of the judiciary on all its segments. The judiciary, as Menachem Begin said, has the sacred duty to maintain human liberty and correct society. And for that end, they established two lines of defense, two gatekeepers, two guardians of the walls, two guardians of the fortress, and it is their mission to maintain democracy in Israel. The first one is the institution of the Attorney General, which has to be independent. That means to have independent attorneys, independent consultants in the government ministries, a government prosecutor who's independent, an attorney general who's independent, and they must all act fearlessly and to maintain a liberal democracy, because there is no other democracy. And if this first line of defense falls, well, there's a second line of defense, and this is the judiciary in Israel, led by the Supreme Court. And it must also be independent and operate fearlessly in order to maintain what? Human liberty and proper civilized society. That is also something he realized 70 years ago. And supremacy of the law, why for 5 or 7 or 11 individuals who were not elected by the people to be able to cancel their decision, which is called a ruling that was then passed as to cancel a law that was decided by the people. How can that be possible? These are questions people ask today, but Menachem Begin said 70 years ago, an elected parliamentary majority can serve as an instrument by a group of rulers, and therefore the people must determine its rights versus the parliament, just to make sure that the majority cannot take away these rights. How can this be done? Begin said this can only be achieved through the supremacy of the law. And those who initiate this regime revolution say, what do you want? This is the case in other Western democracies, and they refer us with their audacity, with their chutzpah, mainly to Canada. And Irvin Cutler is here with us this evening. And of course, these are false arguments, and I have examples from many Western democracies why this is a false statement, but we don't have the time. They say, let's be like Canada. Let's see what the Canadians have to say about that. In a public opinion expression from 2 weeks ago, in which 70 important legal officials from Canada, including many judges and including 7 judges from the Canadian Supreme Court and former Chief Justice Banish, those I think most of them or all of them, including the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, all of them true friends of the State of Israel. And they wrote the following. I'm sorry I'm taking up so much time, but it's important. It's important that you understand what the Canadians are saying. They are the people who love us the most, and they're quite offended when people say that this regime revolution is like the situation in Canada. And this is what they say. And they say this in a friendly way. Of course, a very important condition for democracy is all institutions which abide the law, defend basic rights, and maintain the liberty and dignity of all individuals. Strong and independent courts are an inseparable part of the democratic functioning of modern societies. The suggested changes in Israel are undermining these norms and their various establishments. They subvert the judiciary by giving control of the executive on the process of appointing judges, and a strict restriction on the power of the Supreme Court to determine whether laws abide by constitutional standards. And number 3, empowering the controlling coalition to enforce and laws that violate rights. And these weaken the rule of law by making the legal advisors to government ministries, who so far were independent, now that they are under the ministers. There are so many other things, and I'm not going to list them all. And then they said the following, and this is something that we need to really etch in our hearts. And they say this with their kind hearts out of concern. Israel's international status will be damaged because there will be a suspicion that its Supreme Court is a branch of partisan politics. Is this what we want to become? Those who support these changes point at Canada and at other democracies in order to prove that changes like this, these suggested changes changes are routine, but this is what the Canadians are saying, that those who support these changes point at Canada and other democracies in order to prove that these suggested changes are routine in all democracies. What are 70 important legal Canadians saying? That this is a distorted description because other democracies have mechanisms that decentralize their power. And they bring several examples. First of all, a formal constitution that a regular legislation process cannot change. We don't have that in Israel. An extensive Bill of Rights which defend the liberty and equality in front of the law. We don't have that in Israel. What we have is one basic law, and they wanted to cancel this law. And number three, the ability to appeal to a human rights international tribunal, including the European Tribunal. We don't have that in Israel. And also an election system that's based on regions. We don't have that. A parliament with two houses that allows the upper house to discuss the bills suggested by the lower house. We don't have that in Israel. And a federal design that distributes power between local and federal administrations. We don't have that in Israel. On the other hand, in Israel, the prime minister and the coalition have very centralized power through their control of the legislative. And Begin said that 70 years ago, and the Canadians are saying that today. The only restriction of political power in Israel, there is one restriction. It is the role of the Supreme Court in maintaining the rule of law, the interpretation of basic laws, and implementing the basic rules. And they said that the Supreme Court in Israel, in such a unique situation, has found its place as one of the most important courts in the world. And once again, I reiterate what our Canadian friends say, as they are insulted by this offensive comparison made by those who suggest this regime revolution, as they compare us to Canada. And on the other hand, out of true concern for the state of Israel, they say Israel's international status will be harmed because it will be suspected that its Supreme Court is a branch of partisan politics. So we didn't need to wait 70 years for the Canadians to say that. Begin already said that 70 years ago. Maybe he was Canadian. And, you know, in the context of the harm caused to Israel's international status, we have Gabi Ashkenazi here, so I cannot resist. I would like to bring up this anecdote. In Cast-Led, Operation Cast-Led, hopefully you'll remember that. And, you know, we finished the campaign. It was a very successful military campaign. And then the then Chief of General Staff said to me, we won the war, Avichai. And I said to him, well, it's not a war, it's merely a campaign. And then I said, look, sir, maybe you won the campaign, but now the true war will start, which is the international legal war. And what happened after this? There was the Goldstone report with these terrible, incorrect accusations, as if the IDF and the State of Israel committed war crimes, and operational recommendations for an investigation to be initiated by the ICC. I won't go into all the details. And on behalf of the American administration, Undersecretary of State for Human Rights, Michael Posner, was appointed. I met with him. I was appointed by the state to handle this. I was back then the chief military prosecutor, and then I met with Michael Posner, and it wasn't an easy session, and that's an understatement. And then he said, what happened? I said, nothing happened. We're the same. What are all these claims, war crimes, and that you bombed the flour mill so that the people of Gaza won't have bread? You attacked the water wells in Jabalia, at El Nimer in Jabalia, so that the refugee camp Jabalia won't have drinkable water. An attack on a sewage facility at the northern Gaza Strip, when all the wheat fields of the Gaza Strip will be damaged so that they won't have bread. The attack of chicken coops, 2 million hatching chickens so that they won't have meat and eggs. So these were terrible arguments, but we didn't do any of that, and these are 7 cases out of 36. Could you respond to this? And if I'm satisfied by your answer that this didn't happen, and that's one thing. Number two, if you prove to me that your system is indeed independent, that the MAG, the Military Advocate General, is not a direct subordinate of the Chief of General Staff, that he's independent, plus an independent civilian system, and I'd like to see the answer to all that. And we gave the answer. He said the only reason that we are working with you is because we share the same values, the same ideology, and if you're not there, we're through with you. We have nothing in common with you. So these are very harsh comments, and you know, these comments were checked, investigated, and all these incidents didn't happen, and this is why even Richard Goldstone retracted. He was convinced. But if it weren't for two things, the incidents, and number two, the independence of the legal systems. If we don't have an independent legal system, then that's it. They're through with us. Complementarity, that's a basic condition, and you'll have discussions on that later, right, Pnina? So I won't get into all that. And this leads me to the last quote. We spoke in general terms. We talked about the court. Let's talk about the Attorney General. Let's see what Menachem Begin in 1979 had to say about the Attorney General. A quote from Begin: the Attorney General in Israel has a special status. I do not think that this status is anchored by a law, but this is the custom since the establishment of the state, and a custom is like a law. It's as powerful as the law. Because of that status, the government does not intervene in the consideration of the Attorney General, not a government ministry and not the government as such. The Attorney General reached a certain conclusion, so the government cannot cancel them. It doesn't have the authority to do so. It mustn't intervene with his considerations. A government that promotes the supremacy of the law on all the executive branches, including the government. But those who are initiating this regime revolution, where are they taking us? To have the legal advisors to be appointed by the minister, so then they will be obligated to the minister and not the best interest of the law. If the Attorney General or if a consultant, a legal consultant, will issue an expert opinion, it's very rare. We almost always go with the ministers. It's very rare. But if he does so, he will be immediately terminated. So even that position will not be independent. And moreover, at the next stage, those who initiated the revolution have told us that the general prosecutor, and it's not the state prosecutor, there will be a separate general prosecutor. It will be a political, non-professional appointment of the government. And how dare they say us that this is back to the days of Gilad and Lando? They agreed to have a non-independent general prosecutor? No, that is a false statement. A political general prosecutor's office. And what are the suggestions promoted nowadays? All of them are meant to undermine the independence of the legal and judiciary institutions and to cancel them as gatekeepers. Political appointment of judges, to take away their ability to cancel basic laws, to cancel the independence of legal consultants, the politicization of the unit for investigating police officers, and have political threats. And there are more and more initiatives that their sole purpose is to cancel the independence of all the judiciary institutions and to make them subordinate to politicians. And they tried to do so not so recently. The Ministry of Justice, Amir Ohana, tried to advocate exactly such suggestions. There was already a similar bill, and Aaron Barak, and Eliakim Rubinstein, Yitzhak Zamir, all of them went together with me to speak against this, and so did Meir Shamgar. He was even quite ill, and he left his home in order to combat this, the politicization of the internal police officers investigation unit. And this is why I really objected to the appointment of a minister, because that's the control of a minister on the enforcement agency. These two initiatives were also blocked by the Supreme Court, and those who are for this regime revolution will probably claim that behind their suggestions regarding the committee for the appointment of judges have to do with a personal issue. This is why there's a conflict of interest and why Supreme Court judges cannot discuss this. And I say, on the contrary, this is exactly why the founding forefathers of the State of Israel also considered the Attorney General and the Supreme Court as gatekeepers who are independent and defending the Israeli democratic liberal regime. Therefore, it is not merely their prerogative to renege any attempt of legislation which cancels Israeli democracy, but it is rather their duty to do so. And I trust them that these two lines of defense will not be breached, and they will uphold this legal duty in the spirit of our founding forefathers. I'm about to finish. Don't worry. I see my time is up. So I'd like to ask you, is this the way in which the founding forefathers founded the Jewish and democratic state in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence? Is this what the head of Beitar and Menachem Begin advocated? This is the supremacy of the law. How can we defend the liberty of the individual, which the people of Beitar found sacred? Without independence of the judiciary, we don't have the supremacy of the rule of law. And there was this, I mean, nobody remembers this, but I remember this. They decided to postpone. I know this trick to postpone by 3 months. It means it will never happen. The Committee of Ministers postponed a discussion on a certain bill that seeks to adopt the Declaration of Independence as a basic law. Why did they postpone that? Why aren't they willing to adopt the values of the Declaration of Independence, to just copy it as is? We didn't need it because everybody knew that we would follow this. Maybe they don't want to adopt this because the values of the Declaration of Independence don't go well with this revolution. Maybe that's the reason. And to conclude, I wish to be practical. And it's pretty similar to what you said at the end, perhaps a bit louder or vociferous, but similar. Of course, there's room for correcting and improving the judiciary in Israel. I agree with that. It must be done. I'm a very moderate person. I'm prone to compromises. I'm all for a dialogue, and we need to start dialogue as soon as possible. At least the 4 recent attorney generals, more than that, including myself, have always supported the legislation basic law with the option of an override clause. This has been said in various occasions, regardless of any specific government. And this is why I claim that in the previous committee for legislation, we said that we want this dialogue between the Knesset and the Supreme Court. There's definitely room for discussion. There's definitely room to change things in the judiciary, perhaps, for example, the right of standing and the override clause. But here we're not talking about any kind of dialogue. This is a complete cancellation of the independence of the judiciary in Israel and a complete destruction of the judiciary of the State of Israel, and to cancel the liberal democratic regime in Israel. Our friends are saying this to us. We need to listen to them. The Canadians, the British, the New Zealand, from New Zealand, you know, all these common law states are saying that, and the Americans. One cannot talk about the cancellation of the independence of the judiciary on all its components. You cannot talk about politicization of all areas of the law. We cannot compromise on that. Therefore, I'd like to say we mustn't speak with them as long as they do not withdraw and completely cancel this legislative abomination. But like I said, I'm a very moderate individual. Therefore, my position is as a precondition to every dialogue, just like Manu said, we must completely cease all legislative processes. You need to stop. That's the bare minimum. And as long as they're promoting this proposal, there's nothing to talk about. It would be wrong to talk about it. And even one of these is passed, then there's no longer anything to left about. And then we'll have to have the gatekeepers, the Attorney General and the Supreme Court to defend the fortress. And I am confident that they shall do so.